Is the Conservative Party in an identity crisis? It appears so while looking at it. If you pay attention to the news, you might see that a national councillor of the party, the National Council is the governing body of the Conservative Party, has been suspended. His name is Bert Chen, and I got to know him personally last week, and I thought, you know what? He's now been suspended by the party for opposing O'Toole and calling for his, well, not his resignation, but rather leadership review. I thought it would be a great idea to talk to him and allow all of you to listen in on his thoughts. So, without further ado, this is Bert Chen. My name is Angelo Sidoro, and this is Cancel This. Protect yourself on the internet. Use Ivacy VPN. Crowned the fastest VPN in the world, you can get Ivacy for only $3.66 a month. Sign up today. All right, Bert, it's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Angelo.
Yeah, we were just talking right before we began that we've known of each other, but we only actually met at Erin Gunn's launch. Shout out to Erin Gunn. We met in person there, and now, obviously there's a lot been going on with you in the news, and I feel like we're really like-minded. So I thought it'd be a good idea to actually, give you a platform and talk about important ideas as they relate to conservatism in this country. But before we get to that, I was wondering if you can give people sort of a Coles Notes, a quick elevator pitch on who you are, what your position is, and what's been going on in the Conservative Party.
Sure. Thanks, Angelo. So, I am a recently suspended national councillor representing Ontario for the Conservative Party of Canada. About just under a month ago, I launched a petition as part of a constitutional process to allow the members of the Conservative Party to have a voice to recall Erin O'Toole as the leader of the Conservative Party after the dismal election results. Otherwise, the opportunity for members to uh, provide their thoughts on Erin O'Toole wouldn't happen until 2023. And I wanted to allow that opportunity to happen as soon as possible. And so, therefore, I triggered the petition and hopefully referendum process. But as of Wednesday night, I was suspended from National Council by a majority vote of my National Council colleagues, who felt that it wasn't my place to speak out about the leader's performance and to launch a petition process. Now, this was a close vote, for which the results will be released within 30 days as per our constitution. But I know that this is a divisive issue, not just on the leadership of Mr. O'Toole of the Conservative Party, but ultimately what touches on the rights of an elected representative to represent the members, but also free speech in this country.
Yeah, we can touch on all the things that Erin O'Toole did wrong. I mean, you lay them out in the petition. I think people listening to this don't need to be reminded about the flip flop aspects, the reasons why the campaign was poor. I think everyone gets that aspect of it. I think what people are more interested to know now is, a, why were you reprimanded for, frankly, free speech, for sharing your opinion, and then on top of that, what are you trying to say as a broader conversation, as a broader discussion? What are you trying to say about conservatism in this country? Because look, there's a bit of an identity crisis going on. You have people splintering off. You have people staying at home. I know a lot of people who stayed home, and there's this sort of permeating narrative out there that conservatism is simply what liberalism was 10 years ago, and it's just a reactive ideology. And I think what you're doing, especially as a younger person, is trying to combat that and show that there's an actual philosophy to that. So maybe we should get into that first. Or what do you think? Should we talk? Are we allowed to talk about, like, were you allowed to do this in terms of your position as a national counselor?
Yeah, I think let's start this off with the National Council, like most representative boards at a national level in this country, is made up from people from different backgrounds and different regions of the country. The first one I'll speak to is the state of our country in its federal system is, I think, facing a rift. Once the results are released, you'll find that there was a huge geographic shift in those who felt my behavior was inappropriate to challenge the leader. And these are from the smaller provinces. And I think you'll see that the large provinces uh, rallied around the fact that my ability to represent our diverse membership is paramount. And we'll also see that when you break it down to the individual level, there's a bit of a generational gap that I'm starting to see, obviously, just at the macro level in this country, where now millennials are the largest voting cohort. I think it was the last election, actually 19, where millennials surpassed boomers for the first time. But with the skewed participation rates, boomers still cast their votes more. And how the Conservative Party, which doesn't do well with millennials, brace itself in the future. And I think the colloquial feedback I've gotten from people who've reached out to me personally, either castigating me for what I've done, and those in very raucous support of me, really comes down generationally as well. I found now this is again colloquial that it is typically older members of the Conservative Party that are castigating me because they don't feel that standing up and broadcasting these viewpoints is appropriate. They sometimes even acknowledge the points that I'm making. Just their issue is the manner for which I've done so. While the under 40 cohort definitely says, yes, no, this is exactly it. We should see more of this. That's really the observations that I see coming out of what's happened over the last month to me. And I'm happy to talk about anything else as well.
Yeah, well, the age gap is kind of interesting that you mentioned that because I mean, again, this is anecdotal, but I have noticed that where people that are outraged about this tend to be older members who have this sort of notion that you don't question the leader is the leader, and they don't like contrarians. And I think for younger people, for younger conservatives, I think we're sort of in a spot that is more desperate, and it's sort of a cry for help in the sense that, I mean, look, this is for all the marbles. Our future is really at risk here in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of our culture, in terms of what is allowed in terms of ideas in public. There are certain aspects to things that really matter to us, and I think for some of the older guard members of this party and of this movement, it's sort of like, well, they've had their heyday, and now it's sort of over. I mean, how do you? So you're technically suspended now, and that's not indefinitely, is it?
No, so I'm suspended for a period up to 60 days while the Committee of National Council investigates and puts forward a recommendation as to next steps. Now, I will say here procedurally, the reason they chose to suspend rather than go for an outright revocation of my position is because the thresholds for the votes are different. Suspension requires a simple majority vote, while revocation is 2/3. And you'll see that that's the division that's coming down on the council here. Um, so in this suspension period, no one's reached out to me what I can and cannot do. As far as I'm concerned, I'll still represent the members. It's just I'm not allowed to participate in the in-person meeting that's happening this weekend.
Yeah, so it's gonna sound strange to people that you essentially have been punished for speaking your mind. I mean, I think as the party for free speech, as the party that's meant to be the party for free speech, it's definitely troubling. But I guess beyond that, I think something we should talk about now is free speech itself. I mean, this is something else I've noticed. You mentioned the age gap before. I've noticed that some of the older members also tend to have a disdain. I say older members. I should mention some older Canadians that call themselves conservatives. Maybe they're red Tories. I'm not sure, but there seems to be a dislike towards culture wars. There seems to be a
Mhm.
dislike towards any of that. There's this stereotype of conservatives that are just, I don't care about anything culturally, just lower my taxes, right? And I think some of what you said applied to that as well. Is that right?
I would say so. I mean, if we really want to delve into the demographics, I think that part of the older generation's views of politics, it might be less ideologically driven, and part of that might be inspired by just politics back in the day wasn't nearly as polarized. While Trudeau the senior was definitely a socialist by modern standards, I don't think people were throwing that moniker around back in the day, or even calling Diefenbaker or Mulrooney as capitalists as they clearly are. I think it speaks to the polarization of more recent times. So through the lens of, I think, the older generations, they don't see politics in that way so much. And to throw in education levels, when you get really into the nuances and the ideologies and specific positions on certain issues, it really requires like some university studies in these courses for people to understand it. And I think that's reflected in the younger generation's higher level of post-secondary education to really understand the nuances of it all.
Mm-hmm. So, so with those nuances in mind, I mean, I'm curious as to what camp you fall in. There are conservatives that are of the opinion that we need to win elections, our movement needs to win elections, and Canada is a less and less conservative country ipso facto to win elections. The party, the movement, whatever you need to call it, needs to pivot to the left, and attract voters that are, suburban Toronto voters that normally would vote Liberal and now would choose to vote Conservative. There's that camp that is of that opinion, and I would say the OLO is probably of that
Mhm.
opinion. Not probably, definitely of that opinion. I'm being too charitable there. And then there's the other side that says, well, not so fast. We've seen this happen in elections where conservatives pivot to the left and then your base hates you, and then people you're trying to attract hate you anyways, so you kind of end up in this mushy middle. uh, are you of that mindset that let's be skeptical about this notion that we just need to become liberals?
I don't subscribe to the vision of the Conservative Party moving to what is the traditional left of the spectrum. I think, first of all, the reason for that is the spectrum as we know it is so different than what Hobbes and and Locke talked about.
Yeah.
The world has evolved a lot since then. Um, I think the Conservative Party is ultimately, uh, and the Liberals and the NDP evolve over time on positions, but ultimately it's the approach. If the last thing of conservatism is freedom of speech, individual rights, and the focus on the private sector and and the power of individuals rather than the government to enact and execute on the things that drive this country, then conservatives need to hold true to that. Otherwise, there's no point in having that in the name. I think uh, that doesn't mean a conservative party can't run on compassionate policies to provide more social supports for disadvantaged populations. Can't be more open about immigration, stuff like that, which I think needs to reflect the demographics of the country. Obviously, not from a generational perspective, but linguistic and cultural. So I think the conservative approach should, one, yes, recognize that the demographics of this country are changing, the spectrum is no longer what it used to be, and to use its fundamental approach of empowering the individual and believing that private sector, if not actual corporations, but individuals or unofficial groups of individuals to perform and execute policy is the way forward. And I think that especially amongst Canadians, they may be indifferent to it. They just want to see results.
Yeah, yeah, they do. And you mentioned immigration. I think that this was a big aspect of the race that, I think still hasn't been fleshed out. You've touched on it. I'm in Vancouver. We lost all of our MPs in the Lower Mainland here, but there was one MP in particular that is a fantastic human being, and he lost his seat. It's Kenny Chu, who of
Mm-hmm.
course has been sanctioned by China. Um, Highly, highly principled individual, and even his neighbor, riding, she Alice Tang, I think she lost.
Alice Wong.
Alice Wong, sorry, Alice Wong. She lost her seat, and she had her seat for years. So
Mm-hmm.
the Chinese vote matters, and I'm really torn on this issue because I feel like out of all the things I saw from Erin O'Toole and the Conservative Party, one of the things I liked was the fact that we were not, kowtowing. We were not being nice to China. I feel that the CCP is a significant threat globally. But
Mm-hmm.
I believe you've touched on a point, which is that look, we essentially have given the middle finger to a whole population, and they're turned off. So how do you square that? I mean, first of all, is that accurate that you think the China policy is a problem, and then if it is, what do you do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Angelo. So first of all, I was Kenny Chu's campaign manager in 2015, where we were unsuccessful, and I think that largely tied to voter fatigue with the Conservatives and 9 years of Stephen Harper government. This time was definitely different, and I'll preface this with the the ridings the Liberals picked up. They worked hard at the outreach to those voters in the Chinese community. Some of the ones we lost in Toronto, Markham Unionville in particular, they ran what I would term to be a star candidate, um, a Toronto police, senior officer Paul Chang, um, who in Unionville is more reflective of the demographics. But that candidate, again, being a longtime police officer, but also with a bit of a public profile, he's so unique that he was actually Chinese, but born in Pakistan, so he spoke Urdu, and just that kind of raw combination of someone like that to win over the riding really made an impact. But also the Conservative Party, from behind the scenes, we had a lot of difficulty attracting candidates of Chinese descent this time. The metrics, for 338 ridings, I believe only four, and don't quote me. I think it was only four Chinese Canadians that chose to be Conservative candidates this cycle, while the number I'm sure was more than double last time. So that just speaks to something even before the election, the writ was dropped that the Conservatives were lagging behind. And while, look, my family background, we fled mainland China against the communists. I was born in Taiwan. So, I don't want to go into a history lesson here for people. Maybe that's for another segment. But in the end, the fact that Canadians, regardless of where you're from, identity is still an important thing. And when you get down to it, people vote off of their vested interests. For those Canadians that are of Chinese background, many of us, if not the vast majority, still have family, still have ties, whether it's economic, where one parent is still living in mainland China, Hong Kong, or Taiwan, and remitting money back. So, as a vested interest, you want good relations. So, you can essentially, protect yourself financially. And then two, just from a family perspective, You want to be able to visit them. You want to be able to visit, whichever country without fear of being held hostage, which was something that clearly needed to be resolved. And I think whether he gets any credit or the United States does, but Trudeau was able to pull that off and free the two Michaels. So ultimately, what I'm getting at is vested interests and the conservative approach, while it's possible to be tough and firm on China, needs to respect that. Hold on, people have vested interests. How far can we take this approach without making people feel like they are losing?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And honestly, with a lot of the Chinese that I know in Vancouver, I would say they're almost inherently a conservative sort of population, right? Because
Mhm.
people I know very fiscally responsible tend to be traditional. I would say the Chinese population is like that. So not only was there a dissonance in the last election, but I would say there's also an opportunity for gains, especially when we look at Toronto. I mean, I know the Conservatives expected to pick up a ton of seats in Toronto, and I don't think we picked up any, did we? So
Well, no, I think it was a net wash. It was a net wash in the kind of greater Toronto area, where we traded King Vaughan, which is heavily Italian, for Markham Unionville, essentially. And I mean, we won't delve in too much into the demographics, I think, but what I would say is yes, colloquially, um, I think Chinese Canadians are very socially conservative. This goes back to Confucian values that I think are still alive and strong in terms of family values, in terms of just some of the more traditional mindsets regarding drugs, regarding crime, regarding how to conduct oneself, which very progressive policies are not favorable to, which definitely drove in driving lower voter turnout. But again, the fiscal conservative side, it was clear that in the end, the conservative plan wasn't that fiscally conservative. Um, you know, Economically, Chinese Canadians tend to be small business owners or more entrepreneurial or white collar, and the platform didn't do much to address again vested interests for those people.
yeah, it's the media puts it in this really complicated way, but the way you're explaining it, it is really basic when it comes to vested interests. I mean, the platform wasn't very fiscally responsible, but that goes back to, again, the notion we talked about before, which is that, well, actually, Canadians don't really care about fiscal responsibility anymore. So we're not going to balance the budget. We're not going to do this. We're going to have a carbon tax. It's fine because Canadians just don't care. And I guess what we're getting at in this conversation is that they do care. You just have to engage them. So with that in mind, what happens next? I mean, if you look at the way things are going, we're probably going to have an election 2 years from now since it's a minority. Trudeau's not in any hurry to actually even return to Parliament. So what happens from now in between then? I mean, what do you think needs to happen for conservatism to win in Canada?
So I think this is actually a great opportunity for the Conservative Party to really do some soul searching, which which under this leader and the processes he's laid out is not happening. Um, the Liberals, after they lost in 2006, went on to be defeated three more times. Sorry, including '06, were defeated three times, and they went through three successive leaders, each more progressive than the last, until Trudeau just doubled down on as much progressivism as I think could be possible. While the Conservative Party, I think this time, look, we've really only had one leader since Stephen Harper and Erin O'Toole, and and Andrew Scheer, despite increasing the conservative seat count by more than 20 seats and winning the popular vote, ran as a personal social conservative, but wasn't didn't have many bold ideas, but stuck true to the fiscal conservatism aspect. That formula, I guess, was proven to increase the conservatives to 121 seats, but not and hold the liberals to a minority. What we saw this time was almost a complete reversal of that, and essentially the same result with a slightly decreased seat count of two and a slightly lower raw total popular vote and percentage. So, so rather than the liberal path of kind of becoming progressively progressive, the conservatives are going back and forth. So now it's really time for some soul searching. Is the result a kind of a hybrid approach where some things worked, some things didn't, so let's just fine tune it, or do we double down on one or the other? I I don't think it's my decision to determine that. I don't think it's any leader even to determine that, but some serious soul searching and consultation with the membership, which is why we have policy conventions. And to make the next 2023 convention a leadership review doesn't actually allow us the opportunity to talk about policies and the things that the Conservative Party really needs to talk about.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of consultation is needed, and
Mhm.
hopefully that happens, and hopefully conservatism can actually stay together in Canada, because it's splintering apart, and we might end up in a situation that's like the 90s where it's
Mhm.
liberal forever, right? So I think you're on to
But
something.
that's not
Yeah.
that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'll just go on with this thought. You know, even even if the Conservative Party starts fracturing, it might not be a bad thing if it's it's decided that the country should move with electoral reform. The Conservatives
Right.
staunchly opposed it after the 2015 election. But if some sort of preferential ranked ballot that the Liberals were advocating for, or PR, proportional representation, happened with what the NDP were advocating, Conservatives probably would have formed government even in 19. So the fact on that itself makes some huge ramifications on how the Conservative Party should move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of that is, I guess, to be determined in 2023 at convention. It's a little bit of a ways away. I mean, hopefully there
Well,
is
just
there
because
any
a
opportunity to do that
convention over
sooner?
three a convention over 3 days is just I would say the icing on the cake. The bulk of consultation, the discourse happens organically, and I don't think what's being contemplated right now is a process to really do that because the leader is stifling discussion.
So then, to finish it off, what would you say to someone listening, saying, I wish I could do something. Why is everything terrible? Why do conservatives lose? Um, is it worth getting involved? Is it possible to see change from within? I mean, what would you tell the jaded conservative listener, which is most of my
I would say
listeners?
this. I would say buy a conservative membership if you don't already have one. And the simple fact is if you believe in democracy and you are politically inclined, a $15 1 year membership in the Conservative Party offers you the most democratic opportunities. And if I have my way with a earlier leadership review for a referendum, you'll get more bang for your buck than any other party. So just if you're interested in politics and actually exercising your right to vote on stuff, whether it's consequential or not, uh, on the local level with your local riding association, these are all things that you are essentially given the franchise right to by being a member. Now, we may not always get our way, whether that's on an individual level or people who are like minded about the things I've discussed here, but that is democracy, and the fact that we can participate itself is a reward.
All right, that's a pretty good elevator pitch. Let's see. Hopefully, it works. Bert, thank you so much for coming on, man.
No, thank you, Angelo.
That was the now suspended national counselor of the Conservative Party, Bert Chen. Let me know what you thought about our conversation. I thought we got pretty deep into the weeds there. A lot of it is inside baseball, but I think a lot of you listening will know what we're getting at. And until next time, thank you for sticking around. My name is Angelo Sidoro, and this is Cancel This.